begin Chapter 3 of the Mind Control and Technology series. We'll go through a brief history of our brain's development, the basic neuroanatomy, the neurological basis of how it connects together, and finally the physical factors that control and fuel the brain, all in this first part of the chapter. Due to length issues, Chapter 3 will be split into 3 main parts. A. Min mechanics. B. War on the brain. C. Mental vitality.
The reptilian brain was soon overshadowed, literally, by the mammalian brain. Shown in blue, the mammalian brain grew rapidly in response to increasing demands from the environment. We call this mammalian brain the cerebrum. It's covered by a thin, wrinkled layer called the cortex. Underneath the newfangled cortex, the brainstem, the limbic system, and the basal ganglia date back to the mastodons, the dinosaurs, and the first amphibians. In humans, the old parts of the brain oversee emotion and help build memories. They control heart rate and breathing. They also form intimate connections with the new brain, the cortex. Meanwhile, the cortex collects experience and life's lessons in the form of neural circuits. The cortex calls on these circuits to modulate the influence of this emotional, impulsive side of our brain. New brain imaging techniques are allowing researchers to see in living color how the brain is organized. For example, this area in blue is the primary visual cortex, where we process all incoming visual information. Without it, we'd be blind. This thin strip is the sensory area, where we experience the sensation of touch. Next to it, the motor cortex. Amazing to think that this tiny area is responsible for producing all voluntary muscle movement, for creating the world's greatest athletes and dancers. The brain also has 2 special language areas, located only on the left side of the cortex. All our words come from here. Large portions of the cortex don't have a set function. These areas are called association zones. They do much of our classifying, distilling, and ordering of information. The association zones spend a lot of time talking to themselves and to other areas in the brain. Each column housed a set of the brain's building blocks, the neurons. With their extended fibers, these neurons built communication lines, sending each other messages at amazing speeds. Incoming information about the outside world poured through here for filtering and processing. And these columns, with their intricate nerve cell circuits, also allowed for memory storage, for learning, for planning, something nearly unprecedented in the animal kingdom. Each neuron has a job: to communicate with other neurons. The brain works by forming networks among these cells. Neurons use these communication lines to talk to each other with electric and chemical signals. This simple chain of events, an electrical zap followed by chemical changes, followed by another electrical zap, is the basis of all brain activity. It's how neurons speak to each other. Here, then, is the key to the brain's complexity. There are 100 billion neurons in the brain. Each neuron, like a bit player in a grand production, processes its information, then hooks up with as many as 50,000 other neurons to send and receive messages. The brain takes off on its own, really, in spontaneous and unpredictable ways, without waiting for instructions or input from the outside world. The trillions of neural networks, like an improvisational orchestra, create new ideas and connect different thoughts in a whimsical and sometimes inspired fashion. A little bit now about the communication lines between neurons, that they are powered with electricity. We also know that the messages neurons exchange are chemical molecules trapped inside these holding tanks until an electrical signal frees them. Early experience plays a vital role in brain chemistry. Just as neural networks form in response to how we grow up, so are the levels of neurotransmitters set, in part, by our upbringing. Serotonin is one of them. It's the brain's workhorse molecule, playing numerous roles, not the least of which is to inhibit our violent tendencies. Noradrenaline plays a Paul Revere kind of role. It sounds the alarm about threats from the outside world and prepares us for fight or flight. Substance P is a molecule that carries messages about pain. In a sense, Substance P is what prompts us to cry, ouch. Conversely, our brains produce painkillers, called endogenous morphines or endorphins. Neurotransmitters play a critical role in normal functioning, and yet it's easy to disrupt our chemical equilibrium. If electrical impulses go awry in the brain, the chemical transactions that are so dependent on them also go haywire. Mood disorders and mental illness can result. Change the level of a single neurotransmitter, and it could upset the chemical balance of the entire brain.
Through our evolution, our brains have evolved to be perhaps the most sophisticated on the planet. Despite evolution, though, we still possess the very primitive instincts and feelings we'd evolved to surpass. When the brain has been damaged or is severely intoxicated, our higher, mammalian, brain can become inefficient or just not function at all. Our mind then in a way evolves to that of a primitive and unevolved being, which can severely limit mental capacity, memory and reasoning abilities. Typically along with this devolution, a person will lose their individuality, ability to think critically, problem solve, learn, adapt to change or cope with stress. When we are born, we only have the most basic neural networks programmed into our brain. The vast majority of neurons in the brain aren't connected together at birth, but we quickly start connecting ideas together and storing information we've learned and experienced for future reference. The other elements of the brain are the neurochemicals. In combination with the neural networks of the mind, the brain regulates emotion, excitement, depression, etc. by triggering the release of certain neurochemicals to affect brain functionality to operate the way it needs. A healthy balance of minerals, vitamins and amino acids are required to keep this complex system operating correctly. The brain requires a finely balanced fuel in order to function fully, to repair itself, and to regulate mood and emotion adequately. Nutritional deficiencies result in nearly every mental disturbance or disorder we experience, from severe depression to hyperactivity to any number of diagnosable conscious afflictions. These nutritional deficiencies are only diagnosed as a condition referred to as chemical imbalance by many corrupt or ignorant doctors and pharmaceutical corporations. The solution they then prescribe involves treating an imaginary disease by flooding the brain with excessive amounts of chemicals. The active ingredient in most is fluoride, which dissolves away neural connections to the higher brain, and as a result, emotional signals from the brain are simply not perceived by the conscious mind.
Now, the thing that's most important is feeding the brain properly, giving it what it needs. We also know that the brain requires some very complex molecules in order to function, and that it gets these molecules from our food. Now, if we're not eating a diet that is consistent with supplying these things that the brain needs, our brain is not going to function properly. This can translate into such things as insomnia, difficulty thinking clearly, having difficulty with our memory, difficulty with our speech. So we see that it can have a profound effect. It can also affect our behavior. We know that violence, depression, many of the obsessive behaviors are all related to diet and what we eat.
Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness?
Maybe you're scared of being criticized.
Loss of interest, aches and pain. Ask your doctor about effects or exile. Ask your doctor about healthcare professionals.
No one knows precisely how these psychiatric medications act.
There's not a great deal of scientific support for using them. It's trial and error.
If he had told me then what I know now about it, I never would have taken it.
I took the 9mm automatic, sat down on the bed and put the gun to my head, and I blew a 4-inch hole out the back of my arm instead of my head. Prozac did this to me.
I had 2 sons, David Lee, age 8, Billy 16. The wife 20 years, all gone. I'll tell you why. After being on Prozac for 21 days, my wife shot and killed both of these 2 boys right here. She turned the gun to herself and shot herself twice.
I think the chemical imbalance theories have just not held up.
There's never been studies that show that people who are depressed have a system that's functioning abnormally.
It's not a matter of believing in it. There is no chemical imbalance.
I just feel nauseous, and it doesn't really matter if I've eaten or not eaten. I'm an emotional guy, and I was all growing up. I don't feel like I'm caring like I used to be, and I'm just flat. You know, I don't get angry. I don't get overly happy. I'm just numb. Something in my head is messing with me. And it won't let go.
Please stay tuned for the next part of Chapter 3, War on the Brain.